Tēnā koutou katoa, e mihi atu ana kia koutou katoa I tēnei pō. Ko Lorraine tōku ingoa, he kaihautu waka rererangi ahau. Greetings everyone, my name is Lorraine, I'm a flight attendant, and I am so pleased to be here tonight with you all to share these Ngā Korero Rererangi or Aviation Conversations. We are excited to be hosting our 2023 series of Ngā Korero Rererangi Aviation Conversations within our beautiful aviation hall on the second Thursday of each month during spring. The Aviation Hall at Motions Road is a flagship MOTAT facility that highlights a world-class collection of aircraft. This programming anchors MOTAT as a centre for the interpretation of aviation industries in Aotearoa and the South Pacific, past, present and future. Very shortly, I will welcome guest speaker Warrant Officer PJ Smith to discuss the armed forces through a cultural lens. A former Māori Cultural Advisor for the Royal New Zealand Air Force, PJ Smith has held a variety of key positions within the New Zealand Defence Force. More recently, PJ has held the Manager Te Hono position in the Māori Kaupapa Team at Far North District Council, managing a team responsible for assisting Māori within Te Tai Tokerau to navigate the path through the council processes and increase cultural awareness within the council. Thank you for joining us tonight. Put your hands together as we welcome Warrant Officer PJ Smith to the stage.
Tēnā tātou katoa anei te mi ki o koutou I tēnei pō. I te tūtai anei te mi ki te haukainga ko Ngāti Whātua ki o Odaki I tērā. Nō reira he mihi hoki kia te mā huri huri marae. Kua tata nei I te whenua nei, nō reira anei te mi ki rātou. He mihi ki ngā mate o te wā, haere atu rā, ngā mate o ngā hoia hoki. Nō reira ngā manu taupua I mati ai ti tā wāhi ke tā kultūra. Nō reira anei te mi. Anei te mi ki o koutou hoki kia rātou o tēnei whare taunga. He mihi ki o koutou I tēnei wā kia tono mai ki au, kia tūaki ki te kōrero kia rātou kei mua nei. Nō reira anei te mi ki o koutou. Anei te mi ki o koutou. Nā kai mā takitaki, nā kai whakarongo. He mihi ki o koutou Rocket Labs, tēnā kōrua, anei te mi ki o kōrua. Brian, mihi ki o kōrua. Te te o nā kai mahi marungi I tērā, Sutherland. Ki tōku nei whānau o te taua ārangi. Nau mai, hara mai. He mihi ki o koutou katoa. Nō reira anei te mihi. Āpiti hono tātou hono hunga mate ki te hunga mate. Āpiti hono tātou hono hunga ora ki te hunga ora. Kia ora anō mai tātou. Tihei, mauri ora. Ladies and gentlemen, it's lovely to be here today. And I do think, as you would have heard in my mihi, for those who have any kind of inkling of Te Reo Māori, and noting it is Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, I did acknowledge firstly the haukainga, so Ngāti Whātua ki Odaki, and Te Mā Huru Marae, which has recently opened and it's right next door. They have Ngāpui origins, however, I acknowledge them as well. And then I acknowledged those who had passed away, and definitely acknowledged our hoia or our service persons who had passed away as well, particularly those who had died overseas. And you'll see how that's relevant in my presentation later on. So moving on to our hosts, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come along today, and also to you, the audience, for coming along. And so I look forward to presenting today. We'll see how that rolls. Rightio. Hopi kātua mai I te mōwhiti ahurea Māori. Armed Forces through a cultural lens. Now, having just mixed amongst the audience, I know some of you are ex-servicemen and current servicemen as well, and you will probably understand where I'm coming from as I go through my presentation today. It's very interesting with regards to how we in the NZDF and in Aotearoa actually, I guess, talk about culture. It's slightly different to how people talk about it overseas, and we'll see how that rolls too for tonight. Okay then, so a couple of caveats with regards to tonight. So I've already told Warrant Officer Air Force, my apologies for anything I might say. However, I am Air Force, as you can tell, and whilst I do work closely with Navy and Army, and they're very good friends and very good professional friends as well, I will be talking from my experiences as Air Force, but I will include some of their discussion as well. How it's going to roll tonight, I'll go through some slides, and then at a moment in time, I'll go through what that means from my perspective over my period within the Defence Force, from my perspective as a Māori within the Defence Force, and how the changes have come about and how it was. So, and we'll see how that goes, and then I'll obviously include you as well. At the end of the night, we will have questions and answers, so if you want to hold on to those, we can do that later on. So please, let's crack on. So the scope slide, Pōkaitanga. So we're going to talk about the past. And that's really, really important with regards, and I've just taken a snapshot of a few of the, I guess, occasions where Māori within the Defence Force have tried to remain to be Māori. And then we'll look at what's happening now with regards to changes in the organisation, or organisations as we are, and then possibly what the future holds for us from a cultural perspective. Okay, going straight into Gallipoli, and so what I will do, just so I don't belittle it, I'm actually going to do a bit of reading as well, so it's going to be a bit of a history lesson for those folks as well. So, you know, just hold on to your questions till after, but I'll just go through Gallipoli. So 477 strong Māori contingent of the New Zealand Expeditionary Force arrived in Gallipoli on the 3rd of July 1915. Its service at Gallipoli was first occasion a Māori unit took part in combat outside of New Zealand. By the time of the evacuation, only 60 men remained. Started with 477, finished with 60. The remainder dead or evacuated as special casualties or because of sickness. The contingent was based below No. 1 outpost, which was at the time occupied by 10 Australian light horse. The contingent's campsite became known as the New Zealand Māori Pa. And if you take reference to the photo on your right, the New Zealand Māori Pa. The entrance to the trench connecting the Pa with the Big Sap Trench was marked by traditional figures carved on its wall. There are famous photos of these carvings, hence those, but they were likely destroyed by earthworks post-World War I. This location was chosen because it gave some protection from the shells, the bullets which rained down from the heights. Yet even as they dug in on the first day, the contingent began to suffer the daily casualties from snipers and shrapnel that were part of life at Gallipoli. Now, we've all been through, you know, Anzac Days and Remembrance Days, etc. But it's nice just to, within the context of this, just to try and bring ourselves back to what life was like then. Yeah. And so with relation to this series of photos, so to the picture on the right where you see the Pa and the figurine. So I was in Gallipoli in 2017. The figure on the right is now missing, or was missing at that stage. And then just talking to a contingent who was there this year, most of the writing has been removed as well. And that's just through erosion, etc. So it's a bit of a shame, but that is how it rolls. But at the end of the day, with regards to Gallipoli, they made it their home. This is their safe place, and they marked it as such. Moving on, so World War II, and this is just a snapshot through time. And so the photo on the left is 28th Māori Battalion B Company, and then the photo on the right is some airmen, and there's a few here who have done hakas very similar to that, I would suggest. Some airmen doing a haka in preparation for arrival in Vancouver for training in the Empire Air Training Scheme. And so who's leading them is Pini Takarangi. and he was later killed in action. So yeah, and so people have been, World War II as well, have been holding on to some aspects of their culture. I want you to think about why would that be. Recent past, so a Vietnam photo, and so that's 16th Field, 161 Battery, and the photo was taken 1965, 1966, unsure. However, once again, you've got soldiers, in this case, soldiers practicing their culture. And so from left to right, we've got, left to right as you see it, Gana Tuk Ararana, Gana Nick Bodika, Gana Harry Te, Driver Jim Wharepapa, and Gana Mike Te Pū. And so, yeah. And so you can see that in that small snapshot of time from the First World War, Second World War, and into Vietnam, you know, Māori have held on to their culture. And so we've got to think about why is that? Now, what is that? So, and really, I guess, when I reflect back on it now, in, I guess, these days, and then looking at my past, then why is that? Because, you know, we go on operations, and then we gravitate to the thing that's not just comfortable, but it's safe for us. And this small snapshot here has given you that, you know. They go back to where their safe place is, and it's their culture. So, yeah. So the importance of cultural norms, if you're a history buff at all, and you go through 28th Māori Battalion, etc., but you'll notice that they always had a Māori padre with them. If someone was killed in action, then if there was time and space, then they would do karakia and all of the appropriate rituals that we as Māori do. You know, and that hasn't actually changed too much, quite honestly. So, yeah. So it's just holding on to those cultural norms that make you feel safe. So, yeah. Yeah. So that's the past. Let's look at where we're at now. And so times have changed, typically, as you'd expect. From times of Vietnam, mind you, you know, we've had other conflicts since then, some of which some of our friends have been to in the more recent years. However, what's been happening in the gap years between Vietnam and, let's say, the 2000s? So with regards to that, everything was really ad hoc. So whether you were Navy, Army, or Air Force, whenever you go on operations or you go on exercise, or even if you go on training, you tend to gravitate towards each other. You know, and that's because you can understand the cultural values and norms that those people have, and then how it tended to roll. And talking to some of the ex-Air Force personnel, some of our kaumatua now, you talk to them and it's almost like there's a three-step piece there. You're Māori, you see other Māori, you start gravitating towards them, out comes a guitar, next minute you're in a haka party. And that's how it kind of works, you know, because that's what we do. We create another family bond within a family. And it's, yeah, I believe it's probably just an instinctual thing that we do. But once again, prior to the 2000s, it was very, very ad hoc. It was just done as you made it happen. And it wasn't acknowledged within the service. Possibly rightly so, who knows? And I'll leave that up to you to speculate. So with regards to the 2000s now, so what happened was, with regards to this particular diagram, so you can see that we have the three services there on the right from Navy, Army and Air Force, and also Defence Force. And so, can you see the ticks okay? Yep, thank you. Rightio. So in the late 90s, the Army made a multicultural policy. Not bicultural, but multicultural. And as you can see there, under the Army auspice, they ticked all the boxes with regards to the 6 competencies that we tend to appreciate now. They had te reo lessons going on, awareness training, relationships, etc., bicultural images. And so that was kind of working for them. Of note, though, and this is where the caveat kicks in, they're now moving from a multicultural policy to a bicultural policy. In 2000, the Navy created a bicultural policy, and you see the outcomes for them once again. They're ticking all the boxes as well. And so many of us in this room have had first-hand contact with Navy and Māori culture within the Navy setting. And so, yeah, and so that works for them as well. 2003, Air Force being Air Force. And so in the Māori structure of things, you've got a matamua, the taina, and then the pōtiki. Matamua is the senior whoever. Then you've got the tuakana in the middle, and then the pōtiki at the bottom. We've always been the pōtiki in the Air Force. We've always been last to do stuff, but I would argue last is best because we learn from others' mistakes. And so in 2003, we built our bicultural policy, and out of that, it was the first to create a first full-time role, which at that time was the Māori Cultural Officer. And fortunately, that was me. And so I was chosen to be the first MCO for the Air Force and the first in the NZDF to hold an actual full-time role to coordinate things Māori. So we'd moved from the ad hocery that we'd seen over the decades before into something more formalised. And then following on from that, the other two services kicked along too. In 2010, the NZDF bicultural policy came out, and as you see, there's a few gaps there, and that's for logistical issues. It's a real, an issue for NZDF. However, one of the things that I want to try and point out in this one here, whilst we all kind of tick all the boxes, is that organisation of full-time SMEs, so second row from the bottom, and so you'll see that's the MCAs, they're called MCAs now, Māori Cultural Advisors. And so that's the only full-time people we've got. You'll notice NZDF has got 2, and that's fine. And we've also now got kaumātua and kuia. Really, really important because they provide that in-depth tikanga, the in-depth te reo that helps guide us in our path moving forward. And you'll notice the numbers through there. Air Force, we're very lucky to have 6 kaumātua, but mind you, if you think about it, we've got a few bases. Army got a similar amount of bases, and they have a commensurate number of kaumātua as well to suit their needs. And so, so we've come a long way. And so what that means is, with Te Reo Plan, and now I'm going to harp back a bit. So when I joined the Air Force in 1977 originally, 1977, I couldn't speak a smick of Te Reo, quite honestly. I couldn't. And then I just hooked up with some mates of mine. One of them's sitting in the front here, Ted McCulloch. And Ted had just gone away and done a full immersion course. And so, that was prior to the bicultural policy. But his unit commander had said that, Ted, you go away and you do a full year immersion course in Te Reo. And I was talking to Ted, and then I thought I'll get a bit of that, and I did. And it just took off from there. And then the policies came along, and that actually mandated that we could now send people away on Te Reo courses. And we do. Every year now, each of the services look for at least 4 people to send away. In the old days, it was 1, but now it's 4 because the capacity is growing. And we'll talk about that in a moment too. With awareness training, and so ticks across the grid there. With regards to that, that's about Treaty of Waitangi, why it's there, and how that rolls for us as a defence force. It was really interesting in 2003 when I took up the role and I started punching out these awareness training programs to our leadership courses, which is the great place to do it, so why not? And it was really interesting in 2003 that certain promotion groups, you'll work out who they are, who thought that they were the gate key holders to all things cultural in the Air Force, man, they were not happy. What's all this Māori stuff? Seriously. And I used to get some quite disparaging remarks. Luckily, I had a thick skin. However, times have changed. And so, from the days when I say, why do we have to have all this Māori stuff? and it was worse than that. However, that's how I'll phrase it today. Why do we have to have all this Māori stuff? To today, when you go into the courses, and I dropped into one the other week with the current MCA, young people get it. So times have really changed. Young people get it. They're getting taught, Treaty of Waitangi at school. They're getting taught partial te reo at most schools. And so, they get it. So now our sailors, soldiers and aviators are getting it. So it should make our life a lot easier and our job a lot easier. With regards to relationships, so this box here, really, really important. In the early days, it didn't really matter much. We weren't doing much. A couple of bases closed. Yeah, okay. Then we just took that as it comes. And there wasn't much happening. But now, in the mid-2000s, I worked out pretty quick that I had to go and upskill, because you could see it come around the corner with Treaty Waitangi claims. So as you'd appreciate, most bases or camps belong to the government. Where did the government get the land from? See where I'm going with this. However, and so I had to work it out pretty quick that I need to go and upskill and learn about this thing they call the Tiriti o Waitangi. And so I went and done part-time study, which once again gets paid for by the firm. However, you still have to get it signed off. And so when I was working at an air staff in Stout Street at the time, I'd go up to Victoria 2 days a week, do my studies, do all my papers at night, and I ended up with a degree. But the important thing is, I just didn't end up with a degree. I ended up knowing how I can help our organisation through the times that were coming. And guess what? They did come. They did come. Because now if you look at particularly our Air Force bases, they're changing. Stuff's happening on them all the time now. Yeah, we've closed a few, but the few we do have, there's a lot of iwi involvement. And so you really need to be on top of your game in this relationship space, particularly these days, and particularly I would suggest in the next 10 years, it's just going to ramp up. So be aware of that. It's not a warning for you, Worth, but just, that's the reality of it. And so relationships is huge, and when you think about it, it is one of the 3 major priorities that we have at the moment is relationships. And so we need to be looking at that. Promoting culture, that's a whole lot of MCG stuff. MCG, Māori Cultural Group, so haka parties, etc., and other things too, going out and spreading the word. For instance, use of bicultural language. So all of our services have a Māori name, even though the European name stands emblazoned there, and the Māori name's in small letters at the bottom, but that's okay. Yeah, so Upi Kātua Aotearoa is our defence force. So the Upi Kātua, and so in a par site like this, get my picture? You got fences around it, and so those are your lines of defence, leading up to the pinnacle. So the Kātua is the last line of defence. That's the last line of, pun intended, defence. So so Kātua. Upi Kātua, for the context of who we are as NZDF, we are the last line of defence for New Zealand. So that's how that works. So, you've got all the other fences down the bottom, be it political, etc., but we are the last line of defence, hence Upi Kātua or Aotearoa. Navy, Toa Moana, so warriors of the sea, all good. New Zealand Army, Ngāti Tū Matauinga, that's a bit of a concern on the day because, and they've had a lot of discussions about that, and once again the caveat's kicking in my head, but I know that Army have had a lot of discussions about their name because with reference to how it's intended, it makes them the warriors of the god of war. Sounds pretty cool, but from a Māori perspective, that's a bit show-offy, isn't it? And then obviously you've got us, Taua Ārangi, so warriors of the sky, as opposed to Rangi Nui, the sky god. So so that's how that works. Promoting culture, gone through that, supporting Marae. really, really important. And I've got a slide later on and we'll talk about our marae, but they are our focal points, they are our home, they are our heart. And so we'll talk about those later, but yep, we all now have a marae, which is fantastic, or something similar. And as I said, full-time SMEs and kaumātua. So yeah, so we've come a long way from the ad hocery days from, I guess, even the Boer War, quite honestly, right through until 2000s. We've come a long way. This one here is an interesting one. It's taken out of our stats of 2022. So demograph. Can you all see it? So top line is how many Māori are within each particular service. And so Māori in the Navy, 22.6. Woohoo! Army, 20.8. Air Force, 8.8. And Civies, 8. So it's really interesting to see the disparity there. 2003, when I came in as MCA, the Air Force was down at 6%. So we haven't actually grown that much, but we have grown. And so one has to ask yourself, so why aren't Māori going into the Air Force? And so, you know, and that's maybe a topic for one of those questions later. But it's really, really interesting just to see the comparison there. So just off the bat, one of the reasons is historical. A lot of Army particularly have historical connections to 28th Māori Battalion, to 1 NZDF, etc., whereas we don't have a lot of historical connections to Air Force history for Māori. So yeah, so that is quite an interesting one. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. But does it actually matter, is the question I put to you as Air Force. Well, from my Air Force perspective, maybe that's a good discussion for later. Rightio. Once again, policy stuff. Sorry to bore you on policy, but it's really important. I'm going to say that because I write policy. However, so this is when we can start getting into the really cool stuff because there's photos coming up and some of you may be in them. Maybe. We'll see. So with regards to our 2 policy drivers in the NZDF and in our single services, whakaawe operational effectiveness, we really lever off that. For the civilians in the room, you may not realise this is what we do, but from the Māori cultural perspective, it's huge. And I hope that the following examples kind of prove that to you. And so we'll just go through operational effectiveness. Firstly, we'll give you the line. There it is. So accepting its military and bicultural heritage and applying Māori practices and customs. So the military ethos, we come from 2 fighting kind of whakapapas, the British military and Māori fighting warriors. And so why can't we blend those together? And we have. I believe we've done it quite successfully. I don't know about the folks in the room who have been part of the New Zealand Defence Force, but for us, I believe it works really well, and that's that military ethos, the fighting spirit, camaraderie and behaviours, I would expect anyway. But the key one is that number 4, the unique ability to accept and engage with diverse cultures in operational settings. Because as I'll show you in a moment, and a lot of us have been on ops where we've proved it, it actually works. Our bicultural image and who we are. And the ability to attract, retain Māori members of the armed forces. Rightio, let's give it a crack. Okay. So in 1990, and once again I'll read so that I don't do a disservice to those folks who were actually on that operation. But rightio, here we go. Commander David Ledson and the HMNZS Waikato. Hands up all those who are on Waikato. Bless your head. The HMNZS Waikato was approaching Bougainville in Papua New Guinea. Confused and concerned as to why the HMNZS Waikato was approaching, local residents grabbed weapons and began threatening the vessel. going ashore with his Māori advisory group, performing a haka and engaging in cultural discourse, Commander Ledson demonstrated that HMNZS Waikato's lack of hostility and avoided a major international incident. The fact that this took place in 1990 prior to any formal cultural policies is thought to be indicative of the potential value and considered effort to inculcate Māori knowledge and activities and practices into the Defence Force. And it worked. It worked. Good old sailors, eh? Different flavour. 1998, Bougainville again. So for your history, so from the 70s through to late 90s, Bougainville was a real issue for, I guess, stability. And you can read your history books about how that came about, but we were over there all the time doing stuff, as we do. So operational feat, Bougainville, 1998, once again, for those who know Brigadier Roger Mortlock, very interesting character. He was the New Zealand commander for peacekeeping forces in Bougainville during 1998. Mortlock declared that he had two assets which would be main weapons in his arsenal. The first was a squad of Māori Cultural Advisors who he hoped to deploy as liaisons with locals. And the second was a shipment of guitars that the cultural advisors could use, a comment which plays into the common stereotypes about musical Māori. Well, we'll see about that. However, it was really different, because at the end of the day, it was a peacekeeping force, but he never went with any weapons. The New Zealand force was asked by Bougainvilleans to lead the operation, bolstered by soldiers from Fiji and Vanuatu. They included more women in their troops than usual because Bougainville is a matrilineal society, that is, land is passed from mother to daughter. They didn't take guns. Instead, they packed music and culture. And there was also a film made about it. And so you might want to track that down. It's called Soldiers Without Guns. But once again, we're levering off Māori culture now to make an effect on operations. Moving along, good old Afghanistan, Lisa. 31st of January 2009, so just down bottom right in shot. That is First Lady Mrs. Laura Bush. She was greeted with a haka before meeting with the New Zealand team commander, Colonel Daryl Tracy, and other members of the PRT, so the Provincial Reconstruction Team. And so Major Justin Delahaye was the escort officer. Mrs. Bush was very knowledgeable about New Zealand's contribution to Afghanistan at the time, and she was very interested in the history of the haka. However, if you look deeper into that, you think about, well, is it more than just doing a haka? Is it about opening our doors? And it's more of diplomacy, and this is when it starts to kick into that diplomacy field as well. So, yeah. This one is a New Zealand soldiers perform a haka during the closing ceremony festivities for exercise Cartwheel at Black Rock Training Camp, Fiji, in September 2022. Exercise Cartwheel is a multilateral military-to-military training exercise with the US, Republic of Fiji military, Australia, New Zealand and British forces, and builds expeditionary readiness and interoperability by increasing the capacity to face crisis and contingencies by developing and stressing units at the highest training levels. So that's pretty cool if you love ops, as we do. However, I guess the consideration there is, so that was 2022. If we consider the current dialogue with regards to China's encroachment in the Pacific, and so we're shaping and we're using culture to do it as well. Okay, poho kereru. Anybody know what that means? Here? Okay, poho kereru. So poho is the breast or the chest. Kereru is obviously a pigeon. And so it means the puffed up chest of the pigeon, so therefore full of pride. So yeah. And that is a real enabler for us within the NZDF to incorporate Māori culture in many facets to provide that pride within ourselves. And when we go overseas and domestically, you know, it's huge. And I know that definitely the military in the room have been part of that and have experienced that. And so whether it's domestically in Waitangi, or whether it's Government House. Once again, bordering on diplomacy. So the gentleman you see there is actually the ambassador for Ukraine, noting that that was the 10th of August 22, and noting that the war in Ukraine had already started by Feb 22, and as of just recently, we'd just finished training our 1,000th Ukrainian soldier in Britain. So yeah, there's always linkages, eh? But we use Māori culture along those lines. Now the big one, and this is a real huge one for a lot of us in the military, and that is Op Odaki. And so in 2018, so Op Odaki, Operation Odaki means to return. Return our war dead from Malaysia, Fiji, Pago Pago, and around the world was huge. And so to get selected for those teams was huge. And so we've done a warm-up one in Fiji first. So Brian, you'd be happy to know that. So we went over there. And it's really, really awesome from the point of view that if you think about what we're doing as military and to be part of it, there is no greater honour than to bring those people home to their loved ones. So anyway, but I need to read this out because it kind of captures the essence of the multicultural component of that. For this particular one, blessing ceremony was held at Suva Military Cemetery for Royal New Zealand Air Force, Secretarial Officer Flight Lieutenant George Beeben, MBE, and Fireman Leading Aircraftsman Ralph Scott. Now, onto the Māori component of this. I mentioned kaumātua early, so we have kaumātua. So how we broke, not this one up in Fiji, we just took one team over, and I was fortunate enough to be part of that team. But the kaumātua conducted appropriate karakia, mihi, karanga, and motiatia, along with NZDF Māori Cultural Advisors. An NZDF military chaplain, which we always travel with as well, because it is a partnership. Chaplain delivered a short message to acknowledge the lives and service of Flight Lieutenant Beeben and Leading Aircraftsman Scott. Now, with regards to, if we think back to the matrix that we had, and you got te reo, and that includes tikanga as well, or the right way to do things, there's actually 3 levels that we need to be operating at the NZDF. And so the first level is when we, and on all bases, we're doing this at the moment, we go along for very basic te reo lessons, you know, and our civvies are allowed to go along, and our kids go along, and it's quite a family affair, and that's cool. And so that's what I will call level 1. Level 2 is when you go off and do your immersion courses, etc., etc. And obviously the pool's getting smaller by then of the people who go away and do that. Yeah, we'll go and do that. And so by the time you're an MCA, Māori Cultural Advisor, you should be at least that level, if not slightly higher. Level 3 is our kaumātua. That's why we have them. They do all the very serious things, the serious karakia, and all the serious motiatia. And so, you know, so we need them along too. So there's 3 levels to that. And so we need to think about that too. It's not just doing the basic level then stopping. We need to actually carry on and develop that further. And also along with that are 3 levels of tikanga as well. That is appropriate. So yeah. So that was Fiji. Another photo. Yep. Move around. We also picked up a naval engineering mechanic, Russell Moore, and he was buried in American Samoa. He died of an accident from the survey ship, Her Majesty's New Zealand ship Lachlan in 1956. And so for the warm-up in Fiji, and and American Samoa, then we brought them home. And so this is a photo on the tarmac in Ohakea and bringing home the 3 personnel. So it is quite moving. And as you can see, the culture component of that is quite huge to give them an escort off the C-130 and to their families who are waiting in air movements. So yeah, that was the warm-up. That was in preparation for the big one. So in August, Odaki was into Malaysia to pick up 27 servicemen who had passed away, died over there, either be it on ops or accidents or whatever. However, they were in Malaysia. And so for that one, we had to split up into 3 teams. And so we shot off the 3 teams and started the process. So the process for us, from the military point of view, is we scope, obviously, typically, we'll scope it out, and then we'll go in as the cultural component. Our kaumātua will do the appropriate karakia, prayers, wātea, whatever it may be, to clear the ground, do the appropriate blessings, and then what happens from there is then the forensic team do the digging. They have to check the forensic side of the house to make sure it's the right person and all of that. And then once it's confirmed, then they're placed into a casket. Then the Māori side kicks in again. That casket is never left alone from that day. And that is a 24/7 ritual. And so we move into shifts on that, as well as all the sages, sailors, soldiers, and airmen that came along on those particular groups, and they fit into that system as well. And so we never leave our dead alone, right until the day that they go on the aircraft and come home. There it is. So we spent a good month in Malaysia. Then we picked 27 out of Malaysia, 1 out of Singapore, and there was also 1 baby involved too. And to bring them back home through a charter through Air New Zealand, back into Auckland. A very moving time, I'm sure. So with regards to that, once again, this is a cultural thing. So we don't leave them alone at all. Take them along. We do all the blessings. Yep. Do all the blessings, etc. Hand them over to the families. And then what we've done as teams was we split up and followed 1 each and took them home, which is appropriate as well. Stood on their marae and spoke to them, to their family. It was quite moving because the one that I went to, man, really interesting. You're standing in the, I guess, in the whare nui, and the casket's there, and we're laying accolades onto this soldier who had passed away in a foreign land. Then you take him up to the urupa and you lay him down, and he's next to his grandson. He's like 50 years younger than. It's a really weird thing. You're bringing back so much generation of whakapapa back to Aotearoa. And so it's quite moving. And so, yeah, that was pretty cool. So with this photo here, I just thought I'd throw that one in. And so the blurry figure on the right is actually one of our Air Force kaumātua, Mātua Fred Holloway. And he lives just outside of RNZF base, Whenuapai. And he's still our kaumātua today, or one of our 6. So yeah, so it's just nice to have this photo there, just to show you the role that they do play. Moving on again, 2018 was a really busy time. Here we go, Lekanwa. So Lekanwa, I don't know if many of you know the story of Lekanwa. I do have a little bit of a spiel here, and I'll go through it just for historical purposes for those folks who don't know. But Lekanwa, First World War. Just a week, so this is on the 4th of November, yep. Just a week before the end of the First World War in November 1918, the New Zealand division captured the French town of Lekinois. It was the New Zealanders' last major action in the war. To this day, the town of Lekinois continues to mark the important role that New Zealanders played in its history. Streets are named after New Zealand places. There is a New Zealand memorial, and a primary school bears the name of a New Zealand soldier. Visiting New Zealanders are sure to receive a warm welcome from the locals. The Germans held Lekinois for almost the entire war, from August 1914 through to its dramatic liberation on the 4th of November 1918. The New Zealanders scaled a ladder set against the ancient walls of the town and took the remaining Germans as prisoners. The liberation of Lekinois was just one of the many campaigns that New Zealanders fought on the Western Front, the line that stretched across northern France and Belgium. The majority of New Zealanders killed in the First World War lost their lives in the battles that raged there from 1916 to 1918. And this is a stat that a lot of people don't realise. More than 12,000 New Zealanders died in the Western Front in 2.5 years fighting. This was more than the entire Second World War. So it just puts it into perspective. But so we went to Lekinois. Governor General Patsy Reddy was there for its 100th commemoration, and it was pretty cool. And quite honestly, those people just love New Zealanders. As many of us would have seen around the world, they do just think Kiwis are fantastic, for good reason. However, so yeah, Lekinois. And then, just to move on, Queen's Jubilee. Sedge, you were in London for that, were you? Oh, you obviously would have gone to that, I dare say. Okay, I'll just read this out because this is quite a good one, actually. So this is about the importance that Māori culture plays with regards to organisational pride. Okay. A 40-strong party was among 2,000 military personnel taking part in a 3.2-kilometre march along the birdcage and the mall near Buckingham Palace on Sunday. It was led by 6 Māori warriors who, bearing traditional weapons and playing the role of kiore, the runner or scouts, searched the left and right flanks of the main body. It proved a hit with the London crowd, which had just witnessed the ceremonial best from the British Armed Forces. Taua member, Taua being a warrior, so a warrior, the Navy's Petty Officer Te Tai Maxwell of Te Arawa, which is down Rotorua for those who don't know, said the crowd was relatively quiet until they saw the NZDF marchers with the kiore moving out from the rest on the contingent. Then a big roar went up. It was an awesome experience, he said. I'm pretty proud to be involved in such a celebration and to represent the NZDF and the wider community of Rotorua and iwi Māori, he said. Royal New Zealand Air Force Corporal Kumiroa Rimene of Rangitane and Ngāti Kahangungu was a member of the Matataua, which is the warrior group general or warrior party. Repeating a similar role he played at Lekinois in the previous photo, he was there as well, in 2018. We are showcasing our unique culture to the world and to show that there is a different side to the military. The toa was followed by flag bearer, Army Second Lieutenant Elise Russell, and she comments, it was unreal when the warriors broke off. The crowd went crazy. It was a very special moment. So, yeah. And so it does have an effect both internally on us as service persons, Māori or not, but definitely Māori. And you don't have to be doing it to get that feeling. And so it is really, really important part of who we are as, I guess, the NZDF. So, yeah. Any questions? Saving the names? All right. But probably with respect to our proudest places to be are these. Our marae. They are our sacred homes. They are the place we go back to as military. We have for Māori, we have our own marae at home in our various iwi and hapu locations, but as military, these are our marae. So Rongo Maraeroa o Ngā Hauwhā is the Army marae, located in Waiauru. Beautiful marae. It's got beautiful carvings inside of soldiers in various poses with weapons, etc. It's an absolutely fantastic marae. And we tend to share each other's marae a fair bit as well whenever we're doing stuff. So yeah. Toa Moana, as I mentioned earlier, the name Toa Moana, so Navy marae. That's in Devonport, down by Ngau Taringa, which is Ngā Taringa, two others, which is the sports complex at the back of Navy. Once again, a very beautiful marae, with beautiful carvings and a beautiful history. So, yep, and I guess the reason I'm putting them into order is the Army marae was opened in 1995, whereas Toa Moana was opened in 2000 on the 15th of April, and a few of us were there at that particular opening. And then once again, the Pōtiki, the youngest of the crew, and usually the most mischief, the Tūranga Waiwai Te Tauārangi, or the Air Force Tūranga Waiwai. A lot of the questions have been, so why have we as Air Force got a Tūranga Waiwai and not a marae as such? But we, on reflection and watching our matamua and our tuakana, we looked at it and said, well, actually, our Tūranga Waiwai doesn't have any iwi links into the community. It's just ours. So therefore, it's a Tūranga Waiwai. So Tūranga Waiwai is your place to stand. So as such, we haven't called it a marae for that reason. It's our place to stand. It's our place to stand tall in oratory. It's our place to grieve for our dead. It's our place to celebrate. It's our place. So yeah. So where to in the future? Well, at the moment, the Office of Māori-Crown Relationships, Te Arawhiti, they were established in 2017, and what they've been doing is an audit on all the public sector, and that's will filter down to us or up to us, whichever way you want to look at it. And so when they done their survey in 2018, they found these 6 themes. So partnership, yep, you kind of get it. But I've purposefully put bold against engagement and public sector performance, because I believe definitely for us as Air Force, this is the 2 areas we need to work in, and then the others. So yeah, and so how that looks is like this. So with regards to engagement, we've got to get it right. And as I said before, because a lot of our infrastructure needs to have iwi input and partnership, and our relationships just need to be worked out a lot better than they have been in the past. And I say that openly and honestly. And so we're working on that at the moment. But there's a lot of stuff going on our bases, and we need to get it right. So there needs to be a push in that space. And then the other one was public sector performance. Whilst across the board we're all doing the cultural knowledge, Treaty of Waitangi papers, etc., there is still more we probably need to do. And so the Crown is looking at us as public sectors, and NZDF is no different. So there's a little bit more work to do in that space. However, if you think back to the metrics, I believe we're not doing too badly at all, considering where we come from. So thank you very much to those in the audience who have helped with that. But there's still a little bit of work to do yet. So, Māori culture in a contemporary defence force. We've started embedding into the NZDF culture, the Māori culture. It's working for us. Operational effectiveness, organisational pride. We see that every day. So I think that's working. We need to carry on with that. We have been acknowledged and appreciated, hence our policies. We now get funded to do things, and we'll talk about that in a moment too. And then obviously the 2 components that I mentioned before. So I think we're in a good space, but there's no time to sit on our laurels. We need to continue as well. So yeah. So that's it from the presentation side of the house. I'd just like to say though, acknowledged and appreciated with regards to funding. And so each of the services fund their rōpus or their groups. However, there are no set aside paralines for those people. So it is volunteer basis at the moment, and probably rightly so at the moment. So we volunteer. So you're always, regardless, you're always balancing the work versus the ability to go and, I guess, go and operate within the realms of your culture on behalf of the service. And so there always is that tension, particularly with commanders, managers, and I get that, having been one once. And so we kind of get it. But we're managing it at the moment. In the future, I don't know where we're going to go to with regards to tempo, etc., and how this will play out, and where we need to go with operational effectiveness and organisational pride, how we can build those up. But it is something that we need to keep an eye on. Just for those folks in the audience too, this isn't all about Māori. Even though I've been talking about Māori culture this, Māori culture that, a whole lot of Māoris running around, it's actually for everyone in the Defence Force, regardless. And we just love it when non-Māori come along and join in, because it's fantastic. And so I'll go back to, here's a little story. I was hoping not to do little stories, but we'll do one. Okay, so in 1984, I went to Sinai. Sedge, I think you just come out, didn't you? Yep, and so we had an MCG, so Māori Concert Group over there. And so you get off, that case for me, it was the Boeing 757 on that particular trip. Get off it, and you get handed a pew-pew. So traditional black skirt, for males as well. And you get handed that, say, here you go, where you go, have fun. And so all of a sudden it's like, holy shit. And you just go and make things happen. But the MCG, and this was in 1984, so in Algora, where we were stationed, so we had a really big camp from a New Zealand perspective. So there was us and the Aussies, and we were operating Kiwis at the time. And then there were Americans, obviously, but there were Americans, there were Colombians, there was the Dutch, there was the French, a couple of Poms. But what would happen is that every time one of the senior commanders was having a bit of a shindig, he would dial an MCG. Say, oh, can we have your kapahaka group come and perform for us? You know, and that's pretty cool, you know, every now and then, but you don't want to be taken for granted. However, and so I ended up, as was usually the case for a lot of us who go into operations and take on these extra roles, you end up as the leader of the MCG. And then one time, one of the commanders rang up and says, oh, can we have the MCG come along and do that Māori dance for us? And I basically said no. You know, and that's quite a hard thing to do, is to say no. And I was told our commander at the time, because obviously the tono or the request comes through him, and he kind of got it, which was good, you know, and I really take my hat off to him, because he says, no, they're not going to, because they're not just a performance group. And so I guess from that point, at that point in time in 1984, for me, and that's how it built up that I ended up being MCA, was it wasn't about, you know, there's this little phrase that we use, it's about the substance. You know, it's the substance of the culture that really, really counts. It's kind of like a cake. It's the cake and not the icing. Everyone wants to see the icing and eat the icing, but it's about the cake as well. And so, and that kind of put me on that path of making sure that if we're going to do it, then we do it right. And I think that's probably where we've got to today, and we do. You know, you don't want to be dial Māori. And I know in our relationships, quite often it's dial Mātua as well, which is pretty sad. And so we need to just keep an eye on that. And so whilst it's not a downer, it's just the reality of it. You know, so you have to manage it. But yeah, and so really, that's about it. So, you know, we've come a long way. But I believe that there's still some scope in there for us to make a difference in the future. You know, Māori culture within a contemporary defence force. It's doable, and I think it's well worth it. So on that note, He pātai. Are there any questions? Don't be shy. Yep.
For your kōrero. Thanks for your kōrero. The Kia Eke is the new NZDF strategy, and Air Force are looking to develop their piece of that. You're part of that. Can you tell us a little bit about how that's tracking?
Yep. So yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, Kia Eke is the new NZDF strategy. It's looking at those key things like relationships and supporting te reo, tikanga, etc., etc. However, it is only a strategy. There's no actual lines of operation on it at the moment. As you would have heard from Lauren, that yep, I've worked at other councils and stuff like that. I got out of the Air Force for 3 years, and I was recently, as of January this year, re-employed by the Air Force on the line in April to come back and do the Air Force strategy Māori. And so we will be tracking into Kia Eke. From my own personal thoughts, I think it's probably on track, and there's nothing in there that'll derail us or negate what we're trying to do as an Air Force as well. So yeah, I think it's not too bad as a document, but once again, it hasn't got any of the deliverables. You know, we have to make that happen for ourselves, which we will be doing as Air Force. Once again, the poor Tiki will lead the way. That's how we do it. So yeah, but no, thanks for the question. Any other questions, folks? Ted?
Yeah, I have my work. Backing out, obviously Sinai, etc.
Yeah.
A lot of Pākehā Yemen
were very much colonised, and they were first introduced to Te Ao Māori through deployment.
Yep.
You know, like learning the kapahaka and hangi, etc. overseas to perhaps differentiate themselves from other colonial forces as New Zealanders.
Yep.
But when they came back, you know, in our area, there was a huge middle command section that were right as right New Zealanders, and they were very much anti Te Ao Māori, and obviously you've been through that area there. Nowadays, as New Zealanders get more biculturally aware, and the new people coming through, is that layer still there, or is it diminishing, or what?
Yeah, thanks, Ted, and you're absolutely right. Yeah, we have been through that space, probably more so Air Force than the other two services. But yeah, it is diminishing. There's only a very thin layer now, and it's a minority. It's a very quiet voice, and so with attrition, it will go, because at the end of the day, we need to move on as a bicultural organisation without affecting the way we do operations. Military operations is what we do. We deliver military operations, and so that's what we intend to do. As a Māori, that's what I want to do. So yeah, but no, it is diminishing, Ted. And once again, as I see, you know, because I see now coming through our tūranga waiwai, whenever we have the recruits come through now, you know, I've got kura kaupapa kids who are absolutely awesome. And you think, man, that's so cool. But if you go and talk to them, and this is I guess the catch-22 with kura kaupapa kids, they joined the Air Force or the Army or the Navy. They joined the Air Force in this case, but they don't want to be doing Māori stuff all the time. They've done it all their lives. They just want to be aviators, you know, and I totally get that. So we just leave them alone. Okay, you go out, get a few postings, do a few operations, do whatever you need to do as a young person, because that's why you joined. We'll get you on the way back. So that'll be our replacements, I guess, or my replacements. But yeah, it is the actual, it's changing. It's absolutely changed within the Air Force. And as I said earlier, the Air Force is probably one of the harder ones, because if you remember the slide I had up, 8%, you know, 6% in 2003. That's not many. But part of that 2003 was that, because I know for a fact, you could walk around the bases and there'd be more than 6% Māori, because you know them. And you go, why is that? But the thing was, because when we do our surveys, they don't respond as acknowledging themselves as Māori, because at that stage, it wasn't safe to be Māori. You know, and that's a real war indictment on our organisation at that time, and before then was even worse. But now, even though it's 8%, it's a different story now, why they're not doing that. But yeah, so my actual figures, I would suggest we're probably at about 12, just having spent the last couple of months shooting around the bases, talking to people. So yeah, but yeah, but survey's a survey. It's kind of like that election, and I'm apolitical, so I won't even go there. But anyway, so yeah, it's a survey. So yeah. Any other questions from the crowd?
You mentioned earlier about the percentage of Māori in each of the different forces.
Yeah.
I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are about why the Air Force had such a low percentage and if there's anything being done to increase that.
Yeah, we used to, short of actually asking people, we used to make up all these stories in our heads, go, oh yeah, because the Air Forces. And so if we think about it, going back into the 80s, etc., and so, you know, we were flying around in those things over there, A4s, etc., and that was really cool. But they were highly technological for their day, and for a defence force the size of ours. And so there was a theory going along that Māori don't have the academic capability to handle such a high technology kind of environment. I'm living proof of that. It's wrong. So is Boo Boo and quite a few of other of my mates. You know, because we're aircraft technicians by trade, and we get it. However, so I think in comparison, if you look at it now, that I think we just need to do a better job of getting people through the door, quite honestly, and just showing them what, in this particular case, bit biased, what the Air Force is actually all about, you know. And so as I've got another little side hustle going on, sorry about that work, but I've got another side hustle on about recruiting Māori out of Te Tai Tokerau far north, because I tell you what, there's a ton of potential there, and we actually need to capture those people and bring them into our industry, well, I won't call it an industry, into our cultures, be that Air Force, Army or Navy. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Army and Navy, particularly Army, have a big history going into the Defence Force. There was a study done a couple of years ago, they'd done a comparison between Indigenous militaries. And so Canada and New Zealand, apparently we're hugely ahead of Canada, and I'm not saying anything disparaging about Canada. It's just that our recruiting rate for Māori within the organisations, all three of us, is much higher than the Canadian one. And that's because, and they put it down to, the fact that we've inculcated the Māori culture within our organisations. And so now the Canadians are going back and having to think about what they may do as well. Every couple of years when I was in the other role, I'd end up going over to Indigenous militaries conferences. Really interesting. We're doing okay. You know, that's probably some of the stuff that we don't see. And here at Aotearoa, it's quite often the case. We only kind of harp on the negative, but quite honestly, we're doing okay. We can always do better, but we're doing okay. So, but yeah, technology, is that the issue today? I would argue that with the advent of gas turbines within frigates, Te Mana and Te Kaha, for instance, because they used to come down to our TVS, the technical school, and they would learn gas turbines. So now the Navy are as high, well, not probably as high tech, but definitely high tech. Army are getting more high tech. So yeah, and so we'll see how that all pans out for them as well. So yeah, but thanks for the question. Any other questions? Well, I mean, I hope this isn't one of those tricky ones.
No, more so a statement. Thanks, PJ. But going back to Ted's piece,
Yeah.
I think we'll ebb and flow around the cultural piece and the ability to go and build a hangi and stuff overseas, but we'll always have that cultural element, which I think is great. And your work that you're doing up in Te Tai Tokerau will be a real investment, I think, going forward. But I think it's also we can't be what we can't see. I guess for the Air Force in particular, for our Māori recruits coming through, but across the force we're still doing some great work, I think, as you've mentioned in the positive. But one piece that we're doing at the moment up in Hawaii with the US Air Force are building the Inter-Pacific Air Forces Academy. We have people educating sort of over the world, officers doing a lot, we're getting a lot more in the enlisted. But we're been given, out of the 3 countries that are delivering, it's New Zealand, Australia and the US. US are delivering the readiness Australia are delivering the mission command, and New Zealand delivering the leadership with an element of culture in there. And that's just acknowledgement that that's what we do, how good we are. And out of the 5 those countries, New Zealand has offered that leadership piece. And I think that a lot of it comes through that Māori culture and how we're seen and how we get in there and, without weapons, do great work. So, I think it's that development that's gone on right over the years, and especially led pre your space as well, going through. But if I just declare my hand as Te Pohirina Tangata, which is Warrant Officer the Air Force, but within this audience here, obviously behind the likes of Keith Gow, yourself, Sedge, and others that are obviously just members of that cadre that are exceptional individuals and leaders. So to be part of that has been fantastic. Thanks for having us along.
Thank you very much, Kerry. Keith.
Kia ora, Peter. E mihi ana ki a koe, Peter. He pai ki te whakaaro tō kōrero, eh? I just you mentioned before for those, Chief Gell, for those, you talked about a warrior culture. Since I've left the Air Force in 2011, and I look upon the Air Force and the Defence Force in its current state, and I often wonder the relevance of what it is if one turned the clock back 50 years in regard to foreign policy, where we are in the world, and how you maintain that warrior culture. You're not going anywhere. Use that word. Yeah, and someone at the back mentioned about attracting Māori into the Air Force, and how do you get that, and how do you promote that warrior culture? Because at the end of the day, I still believe we're a warrior nation in regard to the colonisation of this country and what it brought with it, and obviously the Māori spirit that is part of it also. So my question to you is, you've been away for 3 years and you've come back, and what are your observations in regard to the current foreign policy, where we're going, what are we doing, in regard to technology? Are we keeping pace? Is that enough of a profile to attract people into our organisation where it stands today? Your comments on that?
Thank you, Keith. Rightio. So yes, having been out of defence and probably putting defence issues aside, which includes foreign policy, etc. But coming back in and then just listening to the rhetoric around China, the encroachment of China into the Pacific, etc., and without forming foreign policy and making any, promises. But I can see that one of the draw cards we used to have in the old days was this place called Singapore. We used to have, our people rolling through Singapore. They'd be operating out of Malaysia, etc. And for us as well, as Air Force, when we were operating choppers out of there in support of Army. And that was a real big draw card, go overseas, go to Singapore, go and do some stuff. For us in the Air Force, as we all know, a lot of it is just, if you're in the flying ops world, it's just short trips. If you're in, like many of us here, it was the longer operations from 6 months to a year overseas doing stuff, and that was cool. I think that's the bit that's missing. It's the sexy bits that we like as military and that warfighting ethos. And I've come back now, and so where are we going to go in the future with regards to that? What can we give our young people to make them go, wow, that is really cool, I'm going to go overseas. And so, for Navy, I've had a couple of nieces and nephews who have gone through Navy, and man, they're all with them, straight after their recruit training, they're basically on a ship and gone and doing stuff. Not so much nowadays. With regards to us in the helicopter aviation field, we tend to tag on to a lot of ships as well and go overseas. But yeah, what are we doing? What are we doing overseas apart from, there's no real big postings at the moment and there's no real big operations. And without getting too political about it, because that was not the intent of tonight, but I could see probably in my mind's eye, if I had the choice, I would be setting up FOB in the Pacific and we'd be operating out of there. Oh, FOB, sorry, Forward Operating Base. And I won't say which islands, so I haven't sussed them out yet. Anyway, so yeah. But I think it is, you know, you need to give people something to look forward to go, well, I want to go there. I want to do this, this and this, you know. And so, yeah, at the moment, we're stagnating a little bit. We have got some stuff going on in the background, and that's fine, which we can't talk about. But, yeah, I see probably, yeah, the Pacific will be our main focus in the future and see how that rolls out. But for PJ, I reckon it's FOB something that would sort a lot of things out. So, but thanks, Keith. Any other questions from the floor? Oh, another one. Cool.
I have one more question.
Go
If
on.
we've got time for it. You were mentioning about talking about the future, and you hinted to the fact that young people are starting to get it. I'm just curious to know if there's any work being done to work with organisations like the New Zealand Cadet Forces in terms of passing on that cultural perspective and ingraining that in the organisation and what they do, because often they end up in the Defence Force later on.
Yeah, thank you. And obviously, as part of my bio, it did mention New Zealand Cadet Forces, of which I operated with for 2 years. So you're absolutely right. So we need to inculcate our culture, our expectations within our youth. That's a bit of a problem at the moment, a lot of people would say, if you read all the doom and gloom on the papers. However, I think Cadet Forces is one of those avenues we could do that in, but there's a lot of other avenues as well, which are the ones that I'm looking at in Te Tai Tokerau as a separate project, personal project that is. So we're actually going to target the 7s to 13s, as opposed to the 13s, which is generally the Cadet Forces, through to the 18s to the 21s. And so we're going for the 7s to 13s, not so much them, but their influences, be it their grandmothers, their aunts, or their aunties, their uncles, because they're the ones that'll say, boy, you're going into the Air Force. And then obviously with support from CDF, which we've got kind of, we can bring some of the really flash cool stuff. Imagine an NH90 landing onto a school field. That would be really neat. A lot of us have experienced that, you know, and we used to go do those kind of runs with the Dipper 3 Squadron. We used to go out, do the school runs with the helos and talk to the kids. You know, we're missing that kind of stuff, where they actually, the NZDF up north is lost. No one knows what it is. And it's not recruiting's fault, but it's lost. So we need to revitalise ourselves in the eyes and the ears of the people we want to attract. So, cool. All right, ladies and gentlemen, just on one last note, I didn't want to depress you too much, but there's another crowd in town, and Māori Corona. And so what they're doing is, so they were set up by the government as well. And so there's some stats there. This isn't for the Air Force or Defence Force. This is just a general as a little bit of dessert for you to go home with. And as you see there, they're setting out those audacious goals on the right of the screen. You know, 85% of New Zealanders. Can you guys read that? I can't on my sheet. And so Māori Corona is looking at the audacious goals being 85% of New Zealanders or more will value te reo as a key part of the national identity. And now this was part of the surveys previously that Te Arawhiti had done. And so now that we've come up with these, not we, but 1 million New Zealanders or more will have the ability and confidence to talk about at least basic things in te reo Māori, and 150,000 Māori aged 15 and over will use te reo Māori as much as English. So yeah, there it is. someone's trying to map out our future, which is all cool in my books, particularly given it's Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. So, yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of myself, of Lauren, and of the folks here at MOTAT, I'd like to thank you very much for coming along tonight and listening. I hope you did pick something up out of that. It's been a bit of a journey. So when you join the Air Force or the military, in any case, you tend to go on a bit of a ride. You know, you join up as a trade person, you do that, and then you jump into other stuff, you go on some ops, and then you come back and you do some other boring stuff, policy, and then you go on ops again. But I tell you what, it's pretty cool. And I think the NZDF and particularly the Air Force, from my biased point of view, are tracking really, really well. And so, you know, put the word out there. We're waiting, we're ready, and we're moving ahead. So, biculturalism in a contemporary New Zealand or New Zealand military, absolutely. Bring it on. So, ka pai. Nō reira anei te mihi kia koutou. Mihi kia koutou I tēnei pō. Haumaru ai o koutou hoki kāinga. I tēnei pō nō reira anei te mihi kia koutou. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora.